So sometimes you may want to freeze a transition. In other words, every transition by default keeps moving. I'll play this one right here. The camera pulls back, reveals the full timeline right here, and then moves back in to show transition B. However, you might want to stop when we're at full timeline the first time you see the transition in order to talk. There may be voiceover that's explaining the overall timeline, or in this case, the overall process of building your own home. And you may want to freeze on this to talk about the different things that are going to happen in the house building process. So here's how you can actually have a transition freeze. You might think, oh, I'll just make the transition longer and that'll slow it down. And that's true, but it will always keep moving. Maybe you want it to move fairly quickly when it zooms out, but freeze. All you need to do to make that happen is to turn this transition into a compound clip. To do so, let's select the transition and the outgoing and incoming clips. In other words, transition A and transition B. So all three are selected. Then from the File menu, we'll choose New Compound Clip. Now, when you create a compound clip, it puts a copy into an event. We don't need that copy in the event, so you can name it whatever you want. I'll just call this House Freeze, and I'll choose an event for it. Click OK. It gets placed into an event, but I don't really care about that. I'm really interested with this compound clip in the timeline, because now our transition has been encapsulated into this compound clip. It's still exactly the same if we play through it. Works exactly the same. But now, because it's a compound clip, we can freeze it. So I'll move to the point that I want it to freeze. I'll move to the point right where we see the whole thing. I'll use the arrow keys to kind of step through. Let's say right about there is where I want to see the freeze frame. So all I need to do is choose Edit, Add Freeze Frame, or Option F. And Option F will add a freeze frame in the middle. By default, if I select it and press Control D, we can see it's 4 seconds long by default. But you can trim this freeze frame to be any duration that you like. In this case, I'll stick with that default 4 seconds. And now if we play through this transition, the camera backs up, it freezes and holds on the timeline for as long as we want, and then moves back into transition B. So that's part of the process, is you can just freeze any frame of the transition as long as you want. Once you've done that, it's very easy to add additional information. For instance, we might want to add a little title that animates on the screen that explains what we're looking at. So what I'll do with the playhead over this freeze frame, I'll press X, which will mark the clip. Then I'll go to the titles browser and I'll choose a title. And I'm just going to choose this simple little blur title here and press Q to add that title exactly over that section. Now by default it's white, so it's a little hard to see. So let's change the color to black. And let's move it up. And let's call it Building Your Dream Home. Up a little higher. We can choose a different font. Choose a different size. And the other thing that I'll do is I'll go back to the title inspector and I'll say not to do the build out. In other words, don't animate this off the screen. We'll just have it disappear. You could have it animate off as well. So now if we play through this transition, and it's not rendered, so it may not play in real time here, but or full resolution, but we pull out, freeze frame, our text animates on, and then we move into transition B. So super useful process to be able to add additional text or graphics onto your transitions, onto your Ripple timeline transitions. One last thing, I'll give a little plug for Ripple callouts. If you do a kind of freeze frame, you of course can use any of Ripple's callouts to add animated arrows and text to point out specific features of portions of your timeline.